7 experts gave up, but I'm the poor janitor who touched the engine, and what happened left the millionaire speechless. I remember the exact moment I realized I was invisible, not a person, but a shadow in someone else's mansion. It was the day I accidentally overheard the billionaire boss muttering, "She'll never understand the machines." Maybe you're finishing your rounds, checking the cameras, or closing the building while the world sleeps. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I promise, today's story will touch your heart. My name is Rose. I'm 57 years old, and I wear the same faded gray uniform every day. The nylon edges frayed against my worn wrists, the pockets stuffed with rags and a bottle of cleaner that smells like cheap pine. My hands are permanently stained with chemicals, and my knees ache from a lifetime spent scrubbing floors and chasing the invisible dirt that clings to the endless wealth of others. The mansion I work in belongs to the Harrington family, New York's old money elite, a towering testament to their vast fortune built on decades of smart investments in the stock market and real estate empire that stretches across Manhattan's most exclusive neighborhoods. This mansion isn't just a home, it's a monument to their success. Marble imported from Italy covers every surface. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's houses hang from ceilings so high they make you feel small just by looking up. The family's wealth in dollars seemed endless, with assets scattered across multiple businesses, from tech startups that made them millions to cryptocurrency investments, including Bitcoin holdings that multiplied their net worth beyond what most people could even imagine. Their capital grew while I scrubbed their floors. Their dividends arrived in their bank accounts while I counted pennies for my subway ride home. That morning started like any other. I dragged the heavy mop across the polished marble floors, the echo of my footsteps swallowed by the cathedral-like ceilings. The silence in that house was different from regular silence. It was the kind that money buys, thick and expensive, where even your breathing feels like an intrusion. Then, my phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. A text from my daughter, Emma. Her birthday was tomorrow. She invited me to her party. A small gathering in her cramped Brooklyn apartment, nothing fancy, just cake and a few friends. But I had to ignore it. Cleaning schedules don't bend for birthdays, especially not when you're working for people whose time is measured in stock market profits and whose patience runs thinner than tissue paper. The message made my heart crack a little more. I whispered to myself, "Another year I'll miss." The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. While I polished their priceless possessions, made sure their antique furniture gleamed and their imported rugs stayed spotless, the life I longed for was slipping away, unseen and untouchable like morning mist. I wasn't just invisible to them, I was becoming invisible to my own family. I wasn't always just a janitor in someone else's empire. There was a time when I had dreams, real dreams that felt possible. Not the kind you whisper to yourself at 3 in the morning when the loneliness gets too heavy. 23 years ago, I left behind a small one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, kissing my babies goodbye and promising I'd be back soon. I had to leave Emma, then only 14, and her little brother Marcus with my sister Carmen. "It's just temporary," I told them, my voice shaking. "Mama's going to work for rich people, save money, and come back to get you both." But temporary became permanent. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and months swallowed years whole. I sent every dollar home, keeping just enough for the subway and the cheapest meals I could find. Ramen noodles became my dinner companion. I learned to ignore hunger pangs and pretend that the hollow feeling in my stomach was pride, not emptiness. The Harringtons paid me decent money. Not great, but decent. And in those early years, I told myself I was lucky. Lucky to work in a mansion instead of cleaning office buildings at night. Lucky to have a small room in the servants' quarters instead of sharing a studio apartment with 3 other women. Lucky, lucky, lucky. That word became my prayer and my poison. But was it really luck? Or was it just another kind of trap wrapped in marble and crystal instead of bars and chains? Mrs. Harrington, Patricia, liked to remind me how fortunate I was. "Rose, you should be grateful," she'd say, adjusting her diamond earrings that probably cost more than I made in 5 years. "Not many people get to live in a house like this." She'd gesture around the grand foyer, her manicured nails catching the light from the chandelier above. What she didn't understand, or chose not to understand, was that living in a house and having a home are two completely different things. Their love felt conditional, measured, like everything else in their world. They loved the work I did, never the woman who did it. When I scrubbed their marble countertops until they sparkled, Mrs. Harrington would nod approvingly. When I organized their walk-in closets, making sure every designer dress hung perfectly, she'd even smile. But when I coughed from the harsh cleaning chemicals, no one offered me a glass of water. When I mentioned Emma's graduation from high school, an achievement that made my heart burst with pride, the conversation quickly turned back to their son's acceptance to Yale. The small cruelties accumulated like dust in the corners I couldn't quite reach. Paychecks delayed by weeks because the accountant is busy with the quarterly investment reports. Being questioned when a decorative vase went missing, even though I'd worked there for over a decade without a single incident. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room, as if my presence somehow contaminated their air. The assumption that I couldn't understand technical things, complex machinery, or anything that required more than pushing a mop. One evening, while I was polishing the silver in the dining room, I overheard a conversation between Mrs. Harrington and her sister Angela. They were discussing the mansion's elaborate fountain system, a mechanical marvel that had been acting up for months, causing thousands of dollars in damage to the surrounding marble landscaping. "7 different experts have looked at it," Patricia was saying, her voice tinged with frustration. "Engineers from the best firms in Manhattan, specialists who work on the fountains at Lincoln Center. Each one charges us a fortune just to tell us they can't figure out what's wrong." Angela laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the air. "What about Rose? She's always tinkering with broken things." The silence that followed was thick with condescension. Then Patricia's voice, dripping with dismissive certainty. "She'll never understand the machines. Rose is good with mops and dusters, not complex engineering." Those words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, silver polish in one hand, cloth in the other, feeling smaller than I had in years. She'll never understand the machines. The assumption stung because it was so casually cruel, so automatically dismissive. It never occurred to either of them that I might have skills beyond scrubbing floors, that before I came to work for them, I'd helped my father fix cars in his small garage in the Bronx, that I understood how things worked, how they broke, and how they could be repaired. But I was just the help, the invisible woman who made their lives comfortable and their mansion beautiful. The fountain problem became my obsession. Every day I watched the water sputter and surge, listened to the grinding sounds the motor made, observed the way certain pressure changes affected the flow. The experts would come, examine the system for an hour or two, shake their heads and leave with hefty consulting fees. Meanwhile, the fountain continued to malfunction. Water damage spread, and the Harringtons' frustration grew. Their wealth seemed infinite, but even infinite wealth gets irritated by persistent problems. Mr. Harrington, Charles, though I was expected to call him Sir, made his money in tech investments in cryptocurrency. His Bitcoin holdings alone were worth millions, part of a diversified portfolio that included everything from traditional stocks to experimental startups. Money flowed through their lives like water, abundant and constant. But the fountain's failure represented something they couldn't buy their way out of immediately, and that made them almost frantic with impatience. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was dusting the library when I heard Mr. Harrington on the phone with another engineering firm, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I don't care what it costs," he was saying. "I want this problem solved. We've spent more money on consultants than some people make in a lifetime, and this fountain is still broken." After he hung up, He noticed me dusting nearby. For a moment, our eyes met. I saw something I'd never seen before in his expression, a flicker of vulnerability, of genuine frustration that had nothing to do with money or status. Just a man who couldn't fix something in his own house. "Rose," he said quietly, "have you ever noticed anything about that fountain? Any patterns to when it acts up?" It was the first time in 15 years that he'd asked my opinion about anything more complex than cleaning schedules. My heart pounded as I gathered the courage to speak. "Actually, sir," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think the problem might be in the pressure regulation system. The way the water surges suggests that the main pump is working too hard because there's a blockage somewhere in the secondary filtration line." He stared at me for a long moment, surprise flickering across his features. "The secondary filtration line?" "Yes, sir. It's probably something small, maybe debris that got caught during the last maintenance. The experts keep focusing on the main motor, but I think they're looking in the wrong place." For the next few minutes, I found myself explaining my theory, drawing on memories of helping my father troubleshoot hydraulic systems in his garage, combining that knowledge with everything I'd observed during my daily cleaning routines. Mr. Harrington listened, really listened, nodding occasionally and asking follow-up questions. "Would you be willing to take a look?" he asked finally. "I mean, actually examine the system?" I nearly dropped my dust cloth. "Me, sir?" "Yes, you. At this point, I'm willing to try anything." That afternoon, I found myself kneeling beside the fountain's motor housing, my cleaning uniform traded for old clothes and work gloves. Mrs. Harrington watched from the terrace, her expression skeptical and slightly offended, as if my presence near their precious fountain was somehow inappropriate. But Mr. Harrington had given permission, and in their household, his word was law when it came to business decisions. The motor housing was more complex than I had expected, but the basic principles were familiar. Water systems, pressure regulation, filtration, these weren't foreign concepts to me. I'd grown up around mechanical problems and practical solutions. My hands moved with surprising confidence as I traced the pipe connections, listening to the sounds the system made, feeling for vibrations that might indicate where the real problem lay. And then I found it. Deep in the secondary filtration system, exactly where I'd suspected, was a collection of debris that had accumulated over months. Not just leaves and twigs, but small pieces of metal and plastic that had somehow found their way into the water supply. The blockage was creating back pressure that forced the main pump to work at maximum capacity, which in turn was causing the irregular surges and mechanical strain that had puzzled 7 expensive experts. But as I cleared the debris, I discovered something else, something that made my blood run cold. The filtration system itself was flawed, not just clogged, but fundamentally designed wrong. The specs had been misread during installation, and the entire system was operating under pressures it wasn't designed to handle. The blockage I'd found wasn't just coincidental debris. It was the only thing preventing a catastrophic failure that would have destroyed the fountain permanently and caused massive water damage throughout the mansion's lower level. The engineers hadn't missed a simple blockage. They'd missed a design flaw that could have cost the Harringtons hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage, not to mention the loss of their prized fountain and the surrounding imported marble work. If I hadn't found and temporarily fixed the problem, the entire system would have failed within days. I sat back on my heels, holding the evidence in my hands, the debris that had saved their fountain, the incorrect specification sheets the engineers had overlooked, and the temporary repair components I'd improvised to prevent disaster. For the first time in 15 years, I held their fortune's safety in my maintenance-stained fingers. The poor janitor had touched the engine, and what I'd found had the power to save or ruin them. When I explained the situation to Mr. Harrington, watching his face change from skeptical attention to growing alarm to something approaching awe, I realized that everything had shifted. The invisible woman who would never understand the machines had just solved a problem that had stumped some of Manhattan's most expensive engineering firms. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that this blockage was actually protecting the system?" "Yes, sir. And if we'd removed it without fixing the underlying pressure issue, your entire fountain would have failed within a week. The water damage alone would have cost—" I did quick calculations in my head, remembering the mansion's layout and the expensive materials involved. "Probably close to $500,000. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences I'd endured in that house. This wasn't the silence of being ignored or dismissed. This was the silence of a man whose assumptions about the world had just been turned upside down. Mrs. Harrington appeared at the terrace door, her voice sharp with irritation. "Charles, what's taking so long? The dinner party is tomorrow, and I need to know if that fountain will be working." "Patricia," he said, his voice strange and quiet, "Rose just saved us from a disaster that 7 engineering firms missed." The look on her face was worth 15 years of being invisible. Confusion, then disbelief, then something that might have been the first stirrings of respect, or maybe just shock. It was hard to tell. But I knew that moment changed everything. The balance of power in that household had shifted, and for the first time since I'd walked through their front door, I wasn't the one standing on unsteady ground. The next morning brought a family meeting. Mr. Harrington had called together his wife, his adult children, and his business manager to discuss the fountain situation. I was asked to attend, not summoned like usual, but actually asked with something approaching courtesy. The dining room felt different when I wasn't there to dust it. Sitting at their polished table instead of cleaning around it, I could see the family dynamics more clearly. The way Mrs. Harrington deferred to her husband's business judgment while maintaining control over household decisions. The way their son James, home from his investment banking job, seemed perpetually impatient with anything that didn't directly affect his own interests. The way their daughter-in-law kept checking her phone, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Mr. Harrington explained the situation to them, his voice carrying a gravity I'd never heard before. As he described the potential disaster I'd prevented, the financial implications and the failure of multiple expert consultations, I watched their expressions change. These were people who understood money, understood the value of assets and the cost of mistakes. When he mentioned the $500,000 potential damage, James actually put down his phone. "Wait," James said, looking directly at me for perhaps the first time ever. "You figured out what all those engineers missed?" "Yes," I said simply. "And you've been working here how long?" 15 years. He exchanged glances with his father. "And in all that time, no one thought to ask if you had mechanical experience?" The question hung in the air like expensive perfume, sweet, but somehow suffocating, because the answer was obvious to everyone in the room. No, they'd never asked. Why would they? I was the help, the invisible woman who cleaned their messes and stayed out of their way. Mrs. Harrington cleared her throat, a sound I'd learned meant she was about to say something she considered important. "Rose, we're very grateful for what you've done. Very grateful. And we want to show our appreciation." I waited. In my experience, gratitude from the wealthy often came with conditions. "We'd like to give you a bonus," Mr. Harrington said. $5,000 as a token of our appreciation." $5,000. It was more money than I'd ever received at once, more than many people made in months. It was generous by any reasonable standard, but something about the offer felt wrong, incomplete. "That's very kind," I said carefully. "But I have to ask, what happens next time something breaks, something the experts can't figure out?" The question seemed to catch them off guard. They looked at each other uncertainly. "Well," Mrs. Harrington said finally, "I suppose we'd ask for your help again. While I'm scrubbing floors?" Another uncomfortable silence. "Rose," Mr. Harrington said, "what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to acknowledge that I bring more to this household than cleaning skills. That maybe, after 15 years of faithful service, I deserve something more than being called upon only when everyone else has failed. James leaned forward, his business instincts engaged. What kind of arrangement did you have in mind? For a moment, I felt dizzy with possibility. Here was my chance to change everything, to transform from invisible servant to valued contributor, to finally be seen. I'd like to be the mansion's maintenance coordinator, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Keep my current responsibilities, but also be consulted on technical issues, maintenance schedules, and major repairs, a role that recognizes my experience and skills, not just my willingness to work hard. The silence that followed felt different again, not dismissive, not uncomfortable, calculating. These were business people, and they were running mental numbers, weighing costs and benefits. That would mean a significant salary increase, Mrs. Harrington said. Yes, it would. How significant? James asked. I named a figure that felt bold but fair, not excessive, but enough to reflect the expanded responsibilities and the value I'd just proven I could provide, enough to finally feel like more than just hired help. Mr. Harrington nodded slowly. We'll need to discuss this as a family. Of course. But as I left that meeting, walking back to my small room in the servants' quarters, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real hope, not the desperate kind that keeps you going when everything else fails, but the bright, sharp hope that comes when change feels actually possible. That hope lasted exactly 3 days. I spent those days differently, moving through my routine with new energy. When I cleaned, I also observed, taking mental notes about potential maintenance issues, about systems that might need attention, about ways the household could run more efficiently. I researched maintenance management online, using the mansion's Wi-Fi after hours to learn about best practices, industry standards, and equipment specifications. I felt like myself again, not just the woman who cleaned up after others, but the woman who solved problems, who understood how things worked. On Friday morning, Mrs. Harrington asked me to come to the library after lunch. I found her sitting behind the massive desk, surrounded by financial papers and investment reports. She looked up as I entered, her expression carefully neutral. Rose, we've made our decision about your proposal. My heart jumped, then immediately began a nervous flutter. Something in her tone warned me this wasn't going to be the conversation I'd hoped for. We appreciate your initiative, she continued, and we recognize the value of what you did with the fountain. However, after careful consideration, we've decided not to change your current position. The words hit me like physical blows. May I ask why? Several reasons. First, we've been very happy with your work as our housekeeper. You're reliable, thorough, and trustworthy. We'd hate to disrupt that relationship by changing your role dramatically. Translation. We like you where you are, under our control, invisible and grateful. Second, she continued, we're concerned about upsetting the household dynamic. You've been part of our staff for many years, and elevating one employee above others could create complications. Translation. We can't have the help getting above themselves. Finally, we feel that the $5,000 bonus adequately compensates you for your assistance with the fountain issue. Translation. You should be grateful for what you get and stop asking for more. I stood there, absorbing the rejection, feeling hope drain out of me like water through broken pipes. But underneath the disappointment, something else was building, something harder and less familiar. I see, I said quietly. We hope you understand our position, Mrs. Harrington said, her voice taking on that particular tone wealthy people use when they want to sound reasonable while doing something unreasonable. We value you tremendously, Rose. You're like family to us. Like family. The phrase hit me wrong, sharp and bitter. Family doesn't pay you minimum wage. Family doesn't make you live in a basement room. Family doesn't dismiss your skills and then benefit from them in secret. If I'm like family, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, then why don't you treat me like family? Mrs. Harrington blinked, clearly taken aback. I'm sorry? Family members get asked their opinions. Family members get listened to when they have ideas. Family members get their birthdays remembered and their achievements celebrated. When have you ever done any of those things for me? The color rose in her cheeks. Rose, I think you're forgetting yourself. No, I said, and the word came out stronger than I had intended. I think I'm finally remembering myself. I turned and walked out of the library, leaving Mrs. Harrington staring after me with her mouth slightly open. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something that felt dangerously like pride. That evening, I sat in my small room, looking at the four walls that had contained my life for 15 years. The space was clean but cramped, furnished with cast-offs from the main house, a narrow bed, a small dresser, a single chair by the tiny window that looked out on the service alley. On the dresser sat a few photographs: Emma at her high school graduation, Marcus in his army uniform, my sister Carmen at her wedding. Pictures of a life I had observed from a distance while living in someone else's luxury. For the first time in years, I really looked at those photos. Emma's smile was genuine but distant, the smile of someone who'd learned not to expect too much from a mother who was always working. Marcus looked strong and proud, but there was something guarded in his eyes. Carmen looked happy, surrounded by family members I barely knew anymore. I'd missed so much while polishing their marble and dusting their antiques. So many birthdays, holidays, celebrations, and quiet moments. I told myself I was sacrificing for my family. But what had I really given them? Money, yes, but not presents, not attention, not the kind of love that shows up and pays attention and remembers what matters. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Mom, are you coming to my birthday party tomorrow? I know you're busy, but it would mean everything to me. I stared at the message, feeling the familiar tug of conflicting loyalties. Tomorrow was Saturday, but Mrs. Harrington had mentioned wanting the house perfect for a Sunday brunch with some business associates. In the past, I would have automatically assumed I'd be working, would have sent Emma an apologetic message, would have chosen the Harringtons' needs over my own daughter's hopes. But sitting there in my small room, surrounded by photographs of the life I'd been watching from the sidelines, I felt something shift inside me. A kind of internal reorganization, like machinery finally clicking into proper alignment. I typed back, I'll be there. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Then I turned off my phone, lay down on my narrow bed, and slept more peacefully than I had in months. Saturday morning brought the kind of autumn clarity that makes New York City look like a postcard. Golden light streaming through the mansion's windows, air crisp enough to make everything feel sharp and possible. I went through my morning routine, making coffee in the staff kitchen, checking the day's schedule, gathering my cleaning supplies. But everything felt different. I moved with purpose instead of resignation, efficiency instead of desperation. Mrs. Harrington found me in the main foyer around 10 o'clock, polishing the marble table that held fresh flowers delivered daily from some exclusive florist on the Upper East Side. Rose, I want the house spotless tomorrow. The Washingtons are coming for brunch, and Patricia Washington notices everything. I need you to give the dining room extra attention and make sure the silver is perfect. I continued polishing, not looking up. I won't be here tomorrow. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the fountain running outside, the fountain I'd fixed, the fountain that was now working perfectly because the invisible woman had understood the machines. I'm sorry? Mrs. Harrington's voice carried a dangerous edge. I won't be here tomorrow. It's my daughter's birthday. Rose, I don't think you understand. This brunch is extremely important. Mr. Harrington is finalizing a business deal with Robert Washington that could be worth millions. The house needs to be perfect. Yes, you mentioned that. I straightened up, meeting her eyes for perhaps the second time in 15 years. I'm sure it will be. I've cleaned this house thoroughly yesterday, and it's in excellent condition, but tomorrow I'll be celebrating my daughter's 29th birthday. Mrs. Harrington's face went through several color changes. You can't just decide not to work because you have social plans. It's not social plans, it's family. Your family obligations can't interfere with your professional responsibilities. Funny, I said, continuing to polish the marble with steady, practiced strokes. Your family obligations have been interfering with my professional responsibilities for 15 years, and that seems to be perfectly acceptable. What is that supposed to mean? It means that every time one of your children needed something, every time you had a personal emergency, every time your social calendar required extra work, I've rearranged my life to accommodate yours. I've missed school plays, graduations, birthdays, and holidays to make sure your needs were met. Mrs. Harrington drew herself up to full height, a gesture that had intimidated me countless times before. Today, it just made her look small and brittle. That's what we pay you for. You pay me to keep house and maintain your property. You don't pay me to sacrifice my family for yours. Rose, I think you need to seriously consider your position here. Your attitude has become quite concerning lately. I set down the polishing cloth and looked at her directly. My attitude has become honest. If that's concerning to you, maybe you should think about why. I walked away, leaving her standing in the foyer with her mouth open and her authority challenged in a way that clearly shocked her to the core. The rest of the day passed in a strange, suspended tension. I went about my usual routines, but with the knowledge that I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Mrs. Harrington avoided me completely, but I could feel her presence like a storm building on the horizon. Mr. Harrington wasn't home, but I knew the conversation would happen eventually. That evening, as I was preparing to leave for Emma's party, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find James, Mr. Harrington's son, looking uncomfortable and slightly annoyed. "Rose, we need to talk." "About what?" "About your behavior today. My mother is very upset." I stepped aside to let him in, though the small room felt even more cramped with his tall frame filling the space. He looked around with barely concealed distaste, at the narrow bed, the cheap furniture, the photos that represented my real life. "Your mother is upset because I told her I wouldn't be available to work tomorrow." "It's not about one day," James said. "It's about your attitude lately. Ever since the fountain incident, you've been different." "Different how?" "Demanding, ungrateful, like you think you deserve something more than what you have." The words stung because they were partially true and partially completely wrong. I think I deserve to be treated with basic respect. You are treated with respect. You have a good job, a place to live, steady pay. Your parents pay me barely above minimum wage to work 7 days a week, to live in a basement room, and to be available at their convenience 24 hours a day. When I prevented a $500,000 disaster, they offered me a $5,000 bonus and told me to be grateful. That's not respect, James. That's exploitation dressed up in politeness. His face flushed red. Exploitation. Do you have any idea how many people would kill for your position? Do you know how lucky you are to work for a family like ours? Lucky? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've been telling myself I'm lucky for 15 years, lucky to work insane hours for low pay, lucky to live in other people's homes and miss my own children's childhoods, lucky to be invisible and ignored until there's a problem only I can solve. If you're so unhappy, maybe you should look for another job. The suggestion hung in the air between us, dangerous and electric, because for the first time in 15 years, it actually sounded like a possibility instead of a threat. "Maybe I should," I said quietly. James's expression changed, surprise flickering across his features. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. And you know what? You're right. Maybe it is time for me to look for something else, something where my skills are valued, where I'm treated like a human being instead of a convenience." "Rose, let's not be hasty here. You've been with our family for a long time. We have history. We have history where you've benefited from my labor while keeping me in a position where I have no power, no advancement opportunities, and no voice. That's not history I'm particularly attached to." He left without another word, and I knew that conversation would be reported back immediately. The battle lines were being drawn, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't automatically surrendering. Emma's birthday party was everything I'd forgotten celebrations could be. Small and loud and messy and perfect. Her apartment in Brooklyn was tiny, furnished with thrift store finds and hand-me-downs, but filled with laughter and music and people who actually seemed happy to see each other. I brought flowers from a bodega and a cake from a Puerto Rican bakery and watched my daughter light up when I walked through the door. "Mom, you actually came." The surprise in her voice broke my heart a little. When had I become the kind of mother whose presence was unexpected? "Of course I came. It's your birthday." The party was small. Emma's boyfriend, a few co-workers from the nonprofit where she worked, a neighbor from down the hall. But the conversation was real. People asked about each other's lives and actually listened to the answers. They told stories and shared jokes and made plans for next weekend. No one checked their phone constantly or talked about stock prices or complained about service issues. I found myself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. When Emma opened her presents, she cried a little over a hand-knitted scarf from her boyfriend's grandmother. When someone put on salsa music, half the room started dancing in the cramped living room space. When the cake appeared, everyone sang "Happy Birthday" at the top of their lungs, off-key and enthusiastic. This was what I'd been missing. This warmth, this connection, this sense of belonging somewhere just because of who I was, not because of what I could do for people. "Mom," Emma said, finding me in the kitchen as I helped clean up, "you seem different tonight." "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you're actually here instead of thinking about work." "I am here. Completely here." She hugged me, and I realized it had been months since we'd really hugged, really connected as mother and daughter instead of just checking in through hurried phone calls and brief text messages. "I've missed you," she whispered. "I've missed me too." The phone started ringing at 6:30 Sunday morning. I ignored it. It rang again at 7, then 7:15, then 7:30. By 8 o'clock, there were 12 missed calls from the Harrington house and 3 text messages, each one more urgent than the last. I made coffee in Emma's kitchen, watched the sun come up over Brooklyn, and didn't answer a single one. At 9:30, my phone rang again. This time it was Mr. Harrington himself, not his wife or his son. "Rose, where are you?" "The Washingtons will be here in 2 hours and the house isn't ready." "Good morning, Mr. Harrington. I told Mrs. Harrington I wouldn't be available today." "Rose, you can't just not show up. This is extremely important." "I'm sure it is. I'm sure your business deal is worth a lot of money, but my daughter's birthday is important too." "We can celebrate your daughter's birthday any day. This meeting can't be rescheduled." The assumptive selfishness of that statement took my breath away. "We can celebrate your meeting any day too. Business lunches happen all the time." "Rose, I need you to be reasonable here." "I am being reasonable. I gave you advance notice that I wouldn't be available. That's more courtesy than you've ever given me when you've changed my schedule at the last minute." "This is different." "No, it's not. It's only different because this time, your needs aren't automatically more important than mine." There was a long pause. I could hear voices in the background, the kind of frantic activity that happens when wealthy people realize they might actually have to solve their own problems. "Rose, when you come back tomorrow, we need to have a serious conversation about your future here." "Yes," I agreed. "We do." I hung up and turned off my phone. On Monday morning, I dressed carefully. Not in my usual gray uniform, but in the nicest clothes I owned. A dark blue dress I'd bought for Carmen's wedding but never worn since, shoes that weren't designed for mopping floors, earrings that had been a Christmas gift from Emma years ago. I braided my hair instead of pulling it back in a practical ponytail, and even put on a little lipstick. When I walked into the Harrington mansion, I felt like a different person. Not because my clothes were nicer, but because my posture was different. I stood straight, made eye contact, moved with purpose instead of apology. Mrs. Harrington was waiting for me in the front hall, her expression icy and furious. "Rose, we need to talk, now." Yes, we do. She led me to the library, the same room where she'd rejected my proposal for advancement, the same desk where she'd explained why I should be grateful for my position and nothing more. But this time, I didn't wait to be invited to sit. I took a chair and made myself comfortable. Your behavior yesterday was completely unacceptable, she began. My behavior yesterday was completely normal. I took a day off to celebrate my daughter's birthday. Without permission. In the middle of an important business event. I gave you advance notice, and I've worked every requested holiday, weekend, and special event for 15 years without complaint. I think I've earned the right to one day for my family. Mrs. Harrington's face was flushed, her voice tight with controlled anger. We had to scramble to prepare the house ourselves. Patricia Washington noticed that the silver wasn't properly polished. The dining room furniture had dust on it. It was embarrassing. Then maybe you should have prepared for my absence instead of assuming I'd change my mind and show up anyway. We don't pay you to make unilateral decisions about your schedule. You don't pay me enough to own my entire life either. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Harrington leaned back in her chair, studying me with new attention. Rose, I think we need to address what's really going on here. Ever since the fountain incident, you've become increasingly difficult to work with, demanding, insubordinate, ungrateful for everything this family has done for you. What exactly has this family done for me? We've provided you with employment for 15 years, a place to live, steady income, job security, respect. Stop. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Just stop. You want to talk about what this family has done for me? Let's be honest about it. I stood up, pacing to the window that looked out on the garden where I'd spent countless hours trimming hedges and weeding flower beds. You've provided me with employment, yes, at minimum wage, for work that often requires 12-hour days, 7 days a week. You've provided me with a place to live, a basement room the size of most people's closets, with no privacy and no security of tenure. You call it steady income, but you delay my paychecks whenever it's convenient for you, and you've never given me a real raise in 15 years. I turned back to face her, feeling steadier and more articulate than I had in years. But most importantly, you've never shown me respect, real respect. You've shown me conditional tolerance based on my usefulness. You've shown me patronizing appreciation when I go above and beyond. You've shown me the kind of polite dismissal people give to appliances that work well and don't require much attention. Mrs. Harrington's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Do you know what respect looks like? I continued. Respect looks like listening when someone has an idea instead of assuming they're too stupid to understand complex things. Respect looks like acknowledging someone's contributions instead of taking them for granted. Respect looks like treating someone's time and family obligations as having value, not just as obstacles to your convenience. Rose, I think you're being very unfair. Am I? When's my birthday, Mrs. Harrington? She blinked. What? My birthday. I've worked for you for 15 years. When is my birthday? The silence stretched out, confirming what I'd already known. What's my daughter's name? What's my son's name? Where did I grow up? What did I do before I came to work for you? More silence. You don't know any of those things because you've never been interested in me as a person. I'm a function to you. A service provider. And that's fine, if that's what you want to pay for. But don't call it respect and don't call it family. Mrs. Harrington had gone very pale. Rose, I think you should take some time to cool down and think about what you really want here. I know exactly what I want. I want to be treated with the same consideration you'd give any other skilled professional. I want recognition for my contributions. I want a role that acknowledges my abilities and experience, and I want to be paid fairly for the value I provide. And if we can't provide those things, for a moment, I felt the old fear rise up, the terror of being unemployed, homeless, unable to support myself or help my family. But underneath the fear was something stronger now, something that felt like self-respect. Then I'll find someone who can. Mrs. Harrington stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. The idea that I might have other options, that I might walk away from their employment, seemed to genuinely shock her. Rose, let's not be hasty. Maybe we can work something out. But it was too late for that. The conversation had already revealed too much about how they really saw me, how they'd always seen me. Any compromise now would just be damage control, not genuine change. I'll finish out the week, I said. That should give you time to find a replacement. I walked out of the library, leaving Mrs. Harrington sitting behind her desk with her mouth open and her assumptions shattered. The next 4 days passed in a strange, suspended state. I went about my usual routines, but with the knowledge that I was seeing everything for the last time. The marble floors I'd polished to mirror brightness, the antiques I'd dusted with religious care, the windows I'd cleaned until they were invisible. All of it felt different when I knew I'd never have to clean it again. The family treated me with a careful politeness that was almost worse than their usual indifference. No one mentioned our conversation, but I could feel them watching me, waiting to see if I'd changed my mind, if I had come to my senses and realized how foolish I was being. On Thursday, James approached me while I was organizing the linen closet. Rose, I hope you're not making a mistake here. What kind of mistake? Leaving a secure position for an uncertain future. Jobs aren't easy to find, especially at your age. The casual cruelty of that statement, especially at your age, hit me like a slap. But I'd learned not to flinch at their arrows. Secure positions aren't secure if they don't pay enough to live on or treat you with basic dignity. My family has always treated you well. Your family has always treated me like a useful appliance. There's a difference. He walked away shaking his head, muttering something about ingratitude and people not knowing when they were well off. On Friday, my last day, Mr. Harrington asked me to come see him in his study. The room smelled like leather and money, expensive whiskey, Cuban cigars, the particular scent of power and privilege. He was sitting behind his massive desk, surrounded by financial reports and business documents, looking every inch the successful businessman who'd built his fortune through smart investments and calculated risks. Rose, I want to talk to you about this decision you've made. Yes, sir. I think you're making a mistake. A big mistake. You've been part of this household for 15 years. We've grown used to relying on you, trusting you. That kind of relationship is rare in the service industry. Yes, it is. That's exactly the problem. He frowned. I don't understand. Mr. Harrington, you've grown used to relying on me because I'm reliable. You trust me because I'm trustworthy. But you've never grown to respect me as a person with skills, ideas, and needs of my own. When I prevented a $500,000 disaster with your fountain, you were grateful. But you weren't surprised. Because you still see me as someone who exists to solve your problems, not as someone whose expertise has value in its own right. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same expression he probably used when evaluating investment opportunities. What would it take for you to stay? For a moment, I felt the temptation. The offer of negotiation, the possibility of real change, the security of staying with what was familiar. But I'd learned something important over the past few weeks. Some situations can't be reformed, only escaped. It's not about money anymore, Mr. Harrington. It's about fundamental respect, and respect can't be negotiated. Either you see me as a complete person with dignity and capabilities, or you see me as highly skilled help. There's no middle ground. Rose, I do respect you. Do you? When's the last time you asked my opinion about anything other than cleaning schedules? When's the last time you considered me for any role other than housekeeper? When's the last time you treated my time and family obligations as having value equal to your own? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. I thought so, I said quietly. Mr. Harrington, you respect my work. You respect my reliability and my discretion and my willingness to be invisible when you need me to be invisible. But you don't respect me as a person who might have something valuable to contribute beyond mopping floors and polishing silver. I stood up, smoothing down my uniform for what I knew would be the last time. Thank you for 15 years of employment. I hope you find someone who's content with the arrangement you're offering. I'm not that person anymore. I walked out of his study, out of the mansion, and into the bright September afternoon, carrying nothing but my purse and a small box of personal items from my room. Behind me, the fountains ran perfectly, the marble gleamed, and the crystal chandeliers caught the light exactly the way they should. Everything was in perfect order, just the way the Harringtons liked it. But for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't part of that perfect order. I was free. The next few weeks were terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I moved in with Emma temporarily, sleeping on her couch and trying to figure out what came next. My savings were modest. 15 years of sending most of my income to family members hadn't left much room for financial planning, but I had enough to survive for a few months while I looked for work. The job search was humbling at first. Most housekeeping and maintenance positions paid even less than the Harringtons had, and came with none of the security or stability I'd grown used to. But as I broadened my search, I began to discover opportunities I'd never considered before. A friend of Emma's worked for a property management company that handled maintenance for several apartment buildings in Queens and Brooklyn. When I mentioned my experience with the fountain repair, her eyes lit up. "You figured out something that stumped professional engineers?" "Yes, but no buts. You need to talk to my supervisor. We've been looking for someone with real mechanical skills, someone who can troubleshoot complex systems instead of just calling expensive contractors for every little problem." The interview was unlike any job interview I'd ever had. Instead of asking about my cleaning experience, they wanted to know about electrical systems, plumbing, HVAC maintenance, and problem-solving techniques. Instead of explaining how invisible and reliable I could be, I found myself describing the fountain repair in detail, walking them through my diagnostic process and the solution I'd improvised. "The position pays $45,000 a year to start," the supervisor said, "plus benefits and overtime. You'd be responsible for maintenance across 12 buildings, working with our contractors and tenants to keep everything running smoothly. You'd have your own van, your own tools, and a lot of independence. Does that sound like something you'd be interested in?" I almost cried right there in the office. $45,000 was more than double what the Harringtons had paid me, and came with health insurance, vacation time, and a retirement plan. But more than the money, it was the recognition. They were offering me a job based on my skills and capabilities, not my willingness to be grateful for scraps. I started the following Monday. The work was different but familiar. Instead of one mansion, I had 12 apartment buildings. Instead of polishing marble and dusting antiques, I was fixing broken boilers, upgrading electrical panels, and coordinating with contractors for major repairs. The tenants treated me with the kind of respect professionals receive. They were grateful for my help, but they expected competent service, not miraculous devotion. More importantly, I was good at it, really good. The skills I'd developed over decades of practical problem solving, combined with the mechanical knowledge I'd learned from my father and refined through years of observation, made me exactly the kind of maintenance coordinator the company had been looking for. Within 6 months, I was managing maintenance for 24 buildings. Within a year, I was training new hires and consulting on major renovation projects. My supervisor started asking my opinion about equipment purchases and building upgrades. My coworkers treated me like a colleague, not like help. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Emma noticed the change immediately. "Mom, you're different. You stand differently. You talk differently. You seem, I don't know, more like yourself." She was right. I stood straighter because I wasn't constantly apologizing for taking up space. I talked more confidently because my opinions were welcomed and valued. I laughed more easily because I wasn't always calculating whether my happiness might be inconvenient for someone else. I rented my own apartment, a small one-bedroom in Astoria, Nothing fancy but mine. I bought furniture that I liked instead of accepting hand-me-downs from employers. I hung pictures that made me happy and cooked food I actually wanted to eat. I planted herbs on the windowsill and watched them grow in the morning light. Most importantly, I reconnected with my family. Real connection, not the hurried phone calls and guilt-ridden visits that had characterized our relationship for years. Emma and I started having dinner together weekly, actually talking about our lives instead of just checking in. Marcus came home on leave and stayed with me for 2 weeks, and we spent hours catching up on all the conversations we'd missed while I was working someone else's schedule. Carmen visited from the Bronx, and we sat in my small living room drinking coffee and talking like the sisters we'd always been, but hadn't been allowed to be while I was trapped in someone else's life. "I'm proud of you," she said one evening. "I always worried that you'd forgotten who you were, working for those people." I had forgotten, but I remember now. I thought about the Harringtons occasionally, usually when I passed their neighborhood or saw news about their business ventures in the financial pages. Mr. Harrington had made several successful cryptocurrency investments, adding millions to his already substantial net worth. Mrs. Court Harrington had been featured in a lifestyle magazine, showing off the mansion and describing their perfectly maintained home. I wondered if they'd found someone to replace me, if their new housekeeper was as invisible and grateful as I'd been. I wondered if their fountain still ran smoothly, if anyone remembered that the poor janitor had saved them from disaster. But mostly, I didn't think about them at all. That felt like the real victory. Not that I resented them or felt vindicated by my success, but that their opinion of me no longer mattered. Their dismissal no longer had the power to define my worth. 2 years after leaving the mansion, I was promoted to regional maintenance supervisor, responsible for properties throughout Queens and Brooklyn. The promotion came with a company car, a substantial salary increase, and something I'd never had before: genuine professional recognition. At the promotion ceremony, a small affair in the company's main office, my supervisor introduced me to the room as one of our most valuable employees, someone who consistently finds solutions where others see only problems. Sitting in that room, surrounded by colleagues who knew my name and respected my expertise, I thought about the journey that had brought me there. The years of invisibility, the gradual erosion of self-respect, the moment of crisis when I'd finally understood that I had to choose between security and dignity. I'd chosen dignity, and everything else had followed. After the ceremony, I drove home through Queens, past neighborhoods I'd learned to navigate during my years as a maintenance supervisor. These weren't the manicured streets of Manhattan's Upper East Side, where the Harringtons lived in their marble monument to inherited wealth. These were working neighborhoods, places where people raised families and built communities and took care of each other without expecting gratitude for basic human decency. My phone rang as I was parking outside my apartment building. Emma's voice, bright and excited. "Mom, are you free for dinner? I have news." "Good news or bad news?" "Great news. Michael proposed." Michael was Emma's boyfriend, a social worker from Brooklyn who treated my daughter with the kind of respect and genuine affection I'd forgotten was possible. They'd been together for 2 years, and I'd watched my daughter bloom under the influence of being truly seen and valued by someone who loved her. "Oh, honey, I'm so happy for you. We want to have the engagement party next month. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends. Will you help me plan it?" The question hit me unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had asked for my help with something joyful, something celebratory, something that mattered? When was the last time my expertise had been requested for something other than solving problems or cleaning up messes? Of course I'll help. I'd love to. That evening, sitting in Emma's apartment with wedding magazines spread across her small dining table, I felt something I'd almost forgotten how to feel. Useful in the way that mattered. Not because I could scrub floors or polish silver or make wealthy people's lives more comfortable, but because I could contribute to my daughter's happiness. Because my time and attention were valuable to someone who loved me, not just someone who employed me. "Mom," Emma said, looking up from a magazine, "I know I've never really talked about this, but I want you to know I'm proud of how you changed your life. It couldn't have been easy, walking away from security like that. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and the best. It showed me something important about not settling for less than you deserve, about standing up for yourself even when it's scary." I reached across the table and took her hand. "That's all I ever wanted to give you. The example of a woman who knows her own worth." The engagement party was perfect in the way that real celebrations are perfect, messy and loud and filled with people who genuinely cared about each other. We held it in Emma's apartment, which was too small for the crowd, but exactly the right size for the amount of love in the room. I made Emma's favorite cake, the recipe I'd learned from my mother, but had rarely had time to make during my years of working someone else's schedule. Michael's family brought homemade Puerto Rican food that filled the apartment with the sense of my childhood. Emma's friends contributed music and laughter, and the kind of chaotic joy that comes from people who don't have to perform happiness, but actually feel it. As I watched my daughter dance in her crowded living room, surrounded by people who loved her for exactly who she was, I realized that this was what I'd been working toward all along. Not the marble floors or crystal chandeliers of someone else's wealth, but this, the simple, profound luxury of being present for the moments that mattered. Marcus came home for the party, wearing his dress uniform and looking so much like his father that it took my breath away. He pulled me aside during the evening, his expression serious. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I was wrong about your decision to leave that job. At the time, I thought you were being reckless, throwing away security for pride. But seeing you now, seeing how different you are..." He paused, searching for words. "You're the mother I remember from when I was little, before you got so tired and worried all the time. I didn't realize how much we'd all lost when you lost yourself. I'm sorry, mijo. I'm sorry I was gone for so long, even when I was right there. You're here now. That's what matters." Later that evening, as I was cleaning up the kitchen with Carmen, she voiced something I'd been thinking but hadn't put into words. "You know what the difference is now?" "What?" "Before, you were always serving, always taking care of everyone else's needs first. But now, you're participating. You're part of the family instead of working for the family." She was right. For 15 years, I'd been so focused on providing for my family that I'd forgotten how to be part of it. I'd confused love with service, care with sacrifice. I'd thought that working myself invisible was the same as being a good mother, a good sister, a good daughter. Now I understood the difference between supporting your family and disappearing into their needs, between being generous with your love and being careless with your life. One evening in late fall, almost 3 years after I'd walked out of the Harrington mansion, I was coming home from work when I saw a familiar figure standing outside my apartment building. Mrs. Harrington, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered, was waiting by the entrance with the careful pose of someone who wasn't sure of their welcome. My first instinct was panic, the old, conditioned response of someone who'd spent too many years jumping at their employer's call. But the panic faded quickly, replaced by curiosity and something that might have been pity. "Mrs. Harrington, this is unexpected. Rose, you look well. You look very well. Thank you. What can I do for you?" She glanced around the neighborhood, taking in the modest apartment buildings, the small businesses, the working-class families heading home from jobs that paid by the hour instead of by the inheritance. It clearly wasn't what she was used to, and her discomfort was obvious. "I was hoping we could talk about coming back." The words hung in the air between us. 3 years earlier, they would have sent my heart racing with hope and terror in equal measure. Now, they just sounded sad. Coming back to what? To work for us. We've had 4 different housekeepers since you left, and none of them understood the house the way you did. The fountain system has broken down twice, costing us thousands in repairs. The new girl doesn't know how to properly care for the antiques. Nothing runs as smoothly as it did when you were there. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. Vindication because they'd finally realized what they'd lost. Sorrow because it had taken 3 years and 4 failed replacements for them to understand my value. I see. We'd like to offer you your old position back with a significant raise, 20% more than we were paying you before, plus 2 weeks of paid vacation per year. The offer was insulting in its inadequacy. 20% more than poverty wages was still poverty wages. 2 weeks of vacation after 15 years of service was barely acknowledgement of my humanity. But more than that, it revealed how little they still understood about why I'd left. Mrs. Harrington, why do you think I left? Well, we had some disagreements about scheduling and responsibilities, but I think we can work those things out. You think I left because of scheduling disagreements? Didn't you? I looked at this woman who'd employed me for 15 years without ever really seeing me, who was standing in my neighborhood offering me scraps and expecting gratitude, and I felt something I'd never experienced during all my years of service. Genuine pity for her. I left because you never treated me like a complete person, because you saw me as a function, not a human being with needs and capabilities beyond housekeeping, because after 15 years of faithful service, you couldn't be bothered to learn my birthday or my children's names or anything about who I was beyond my usefulness to you. Her face flushed. That's not. We always treated you with respect. No, you didn't. You treated me with conditional tolerance. There's a difference. Rose, I think you're being very unfair. We gave you a job, a place to live. You gave me employment in exchange for my labor. That's a business transaction, not a favor. And you expected gratitude as if you were doing me charity instead of receiving valuable service. She straightened up, her old hauteur returning. I came here to offer you a generous opportunity to return to a position where you were valued and appreciated. If I was valued and appreciated, you wouldn't have needed 4 different people to try to replace me. If I was valued and appreciated, you would have found a way to keep me in the first place. What would it take? What would you want to come back? The question revealed how fundamentally she still didn't understand. She was still trying to negotiate, still assuming this was about money or benefits or working conditions, still missing the point entirely. Mrs. Harrington, I make more money now than you're offering. I have better benefits, more vacation time, and genuine professional respect. But more than that, I have something I never had working for you. Dignity. You can't offer me that because you don't understand what it means. I turned toward my apartment building, then paused and looked back at her. I hope you find someone who's satisfied with what you're offering, but that person isn't me anymore. I walked away, leaving her standing on the sidewalk with her mouth open and her certainties shattered for the second time. That night, I sat in my small living room with a cup of tea and thought about the conversation. 3 years ago, her offer would have thrown my entire life into chaos. The security of returning to something familiar, the fear of making the wrong choice, the old guilt about abandoning people who needed me. All of it would have kept me awake for weeks. Now, I felt nothing but clarity. I'd built a new life, one where I was valued for my skills and treated with professional respect. More importantly, I'd rebuilt my relationship with my family and my sense of self-worth. Going back would have meant abandoning all of that for the illusion of security. The next morning, I told Emma about Mrs. Harrington's visit over coffee before work. Mom, you're not even tempted? Not for a second. Good. You know why? Why? Because you're not the same person who worked for them. The woman who would have been tempted by that offer doesn't exist anymore. She was right. I'd changed so fundamentally that Mrs. Harrington's world felt foreign to me now, like a place I'd visited long ago, but could never really call home. The Rose, who'd polished marble floors and accepted gratitude instead of respect, had been replaced by someone who expected to be valued for her contributions and treated as a complete person. That evening, I called Marcus to tell him about the encounter. "How did it feel?" he asked. "Seeing her again?" "Sad, mostly. Not angry or vindictive. Just sad that she still doesn't understand why I left." "Maybe she never will." "Probably not, but that's not my problem anymore." A few months later, Emma announced that she and Michael had set a wedding date for the following spring. As we sat in her apartment planning the details, she made a request that surprised me. "Mom, I want you to walk me down the aisle." "Honey, that's usually the father's role. You're the parent who's been there for me. You're the one who sacrificed to make sure I could go to college, who worked extra hours to help with my student loans, who taught me that I deserved to be treated with respect. If anyone should walk me down the aisle, it's you." I cried then, right there at her kitchen table, surrounded by wedding magazines and guest lists and fabric samples, all those years of missing birthday parties and school plays and family dinners, all those sacrifices that had felt so necessary at the time. They'd led to this moment when my daughter wanted me by her side as she started the most important new chapter of her life. The wedding was everything it should have been, small and heartfelt and filled with people who genuinely loved the couple. Emma looked radiant in a simple dress we'd found at a boutique in Brooklyn, her happiness so bright it seemed to illuminate the entire church. As I walked her down the aisle, I thought about the journey that had brought us both to this moment. Emma had grown into a woman who knew her own worth, who expected to be treated with love and respect, who wouldn't accept less than she deserved from the people in her life. Watching her marry Michael, a man who clearly adored her and valued her opinions and treated her as an equal partner, I knew I'd finally given her something more valuable than financial support. I'd given her an example of a woman who refused to disappear into other people's needs. After the ceremony, during the small reception in the church hall, Michael found me sitting at a table decorated with flowers Emma had arranged herself. "Mrs. Rivera, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For raising a daughter who knows she deserves to be respected, for showing her what it looks like to stand up for herself. Emma told me about your decision to leave that job, how scary it was, but how necessary. She said it taught her that security isn't worth much if it comes at the cost of your dignity. That's the most important lesson I could give her, and the hardest one to learn, but she learned it from watching you." As the evening wound down and the last guests were saying their goodbyes, Emma pulled me aside for a private moment. "Mom, I have something to tell you. We're going to start trying for a baby soon, and when that happens, I want you to really be part of it, not just helping from a distance, but actually being present, being grandma, not just someone who sends money and visits when she can." "I'll be there," I promised. "Whatever you need, however I can help, I'll be there." "I know you will. That's what makes all the difference." Now, 4 years after walking out of the Harrington mansion, I live a life that finally belongs to me. My apartment in Astoria is small but comfortable, filled with furniture I chose and pictures that make me smile. I work for a company that values my expertise and treats me with professional respect. I make enough money to live comfortably and help my family when they need it, without sacrificing my own well-being. Most importantly, I'm present in my own life. When Emma calls, I have time to really talk to her. When Marcus comes home on leave, we can spend actual quality time together. When Carmen wants to visit, I can take vacation days to focus on our sisterhood instead of working around someone else's schedule. I've started taking night classes at the community college, mechanical engineering courses that build on the practical knowledge I've accumulated over decades of problem solving. At 59, I'm finally pursuing the education I'd always wanted, but never thought I could afford or deserved. The classes are challenging, but in a good way. I'm learning alongside people half my age, and instead of feeling intimidated, I feel energized. My practical experience gives me insights that complement their theoretical knowledge, and I've found that I have as much to teach as I have to learn. My instructor, Dr. Martinez, recently suggested that I consider applying for a scholarship to pursue a bachelor's degree in engineering technology. "Rose, You have a natural aptitude for this work and years of practical experience. With formal training, you could move into consulting, maybe even start your own business. The idea would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. Now, it feels like a natural next step. I still drive past the Harrington Mansion sometimes, when work takes me to that part of Manhattan. The fountains still run, the grounds are still perfectly manicured, the marble still gleams in the sunlight. I don't feel anger when I see it anymore, or longing for the security I gave up. I feel something closer to gratitude, not for the way they treated me, but for the lesson they taught me about my own worth. They showed me what it felt like to be invisible, which helped me understand what it means to be seen. They showed me what it felt like to be taken for granted, which taught me to value people who appreciate my contributions. They showed me what it felt like to lose myself in someone else's needs, which helped me find my way back to who I really am. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever wondered whether your contributions matter, if you've ever stayed in a situation that diminished you because leaving felt too scary, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. Your dignity isn't dependent on other people's permission. Your life doesn't have to be small just because someone else benefits from keeping you small. The woman who cleaned marble floors for 15 years and the woman who manages building maintenance for dozens of properties today are the same person. The difference isn't in my skills or my value or my worth as a human being. The difference is in my willingness to claim what was always mine: respect, dignity, and the right to be seen as a complete person. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is believe you deserve better. Sometimes the most radical act is refusing to disappear into other people's convenience. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is the example of a person who knows their own worth. Have you ever felt like you were living in someone else's shadow, giving everything while receiving little recognition in return? Have you ever had to choose between security and dignity? Between staying invisible and claiming your worth? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe. It helps this message reach someone else who's been working behind the scenes, giving their all without recognition. To continue these emotional journeys, we've created a special podcast with stories equally powerful. You can find it here on the left. Thank you for joining me on this journey of the heart. Remember, you are not invisible. Your worth is not negotiable, and it's never too late to claim the life that's yours. I'll see you in the next story.